Africa is on the verge of recovery, and that recovery is looking better after COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions pushed the continent into its first recession in 25 years. The latest World Bank Africa's Pulse report says that Sub-Saharan Africa is set to bounce back from the loss experienced in 2020. The region is expected to expand by 3.3% in 2021, 1% higher than the April 2021 forecast of 2.3%. However, the chief economist for Africa at the World Bank, Albert Zufak, noted that faster access to COVID-19 vaccines would speed up growth in 2022 and 2023. The rebound is currently fueled by elevated commodity prices and renewed commerce after countries relaxed stringent pandemic measures. But there are still factors that will continue to make the continent vulnerable to protracted economic damage, debt burden, and slow recovery. Whatever the rate of recovery, it will not be even across the sub-regions of sub-Saharan Africa. And that is another concern. Today, we'll be looking at the latest World Bank projections for sub-Saharan Africa. I'm Tolu, Adeleru, Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me is Dr. Andrew Nevin, partner and chief economist for PricewaterhouseCoopers, that's PwC Nigeria. Andrew, welcome back to Business Edge. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Hello, it's always great to be with you.
Thank you. So let's start with the projections and the very slight change in that projection. So the World Bank changed its projection from 2.3% to 3.3% for sub-Saharan Africa for 2021 after a contraction of 2% in 2020. Can this 1% be considered something significant, a significant growth margin? Where is the extra 1% growth coming from?
Well, I think first off, not that I love the World Bank, but I mean, we need to be a little bit careful of these statistics because the way they're formed is not always accurate, and it's better to look on the ground at what's happened. But I think it's fair to say that through COVID, certainly in West Africa and East Africa, there's been a resiliency that other countries didn't experience. So if you think, for example, in Nigeria, where we are today, we shrunk about 1.9% in headline GDP. The UK shrunk, if I remember right, 6 or 8%. The US shrunk similarly. Canada shrunk similarly. We were very resilient. And in fact, Ghana actually grew its economy through COVID. So, I mean, as terrible as COVID has been globally, in some ways, I think Africa's really shown a resilience on it. So it's not a big surprise the World Bank is now discovering this and now kind of upgrading our growth numbers.
When you look at those numbers, as you pointed out, the contractions that happened, they were uneven. The growth also is going to be uneven as well. But it said that the world is going to have the most robust post-recession recovery in 80 years, and that's happening in 2021. Major economies are looking to register strong growth. Now, global growth is initially expected to accelerate at 5.6%, but so far it's even done a bit better than that in some of these economies. But the projection for sub-Saharan Africa is less than 4%. And while we've been chasing double-digit growth even before COVID-19, the number we're seeing right now for projected growth is not so much. How comfortable are you with that? Is that just something we're going to have to be comfortable with in this period as we struggle to get out of the COVID-19 induced economic issues?
Well, again, I think that the World Bank narrative is actually not correct. To begin with, growth around the world is slowing down markedly. So even the numbers you cited are already out of date. Canada's economy actually shrunk in July, may continue to shrink in August. We're having real problems in the United Kingdom. The economy is likely shrinking there. It was just, to me, kind of a myth that was put out by the World Bank of how robust this recovery would be. And of course, in China, we see with Evergrande, so the real estate problems that they're having and that they're likely to accelerate. Simultaneously, in Africa, as I said, I think we're more robust, more resilient than the World Bank says. And to give you an example, the World Bank said that the remittances to Nigeria, which really are the key driver of our FX support here, went from 25 billion in 2019 to about 18 billion in 2020. That is absolutely false. All that happened was because of the widening gap between the parallel rate and the official rate. There was much more money that flowed through the unofficial channels. So I think it just highlights, again, these statistics, but specifically with respect to sub-Saharan Africa, we have to remember that it's really skewed by the performance of South Africa. As I said, Ghana did really well economically through the pandemic. Nigeria did fairly well. Ivory Coast did really well. I think in West Africa, what dragged down sub-Saharan Africa is South Africa. So as you said, different countries are going in different directions. Lots of bright spots. East Africa, many things are going on. Obviously, Ethiopia has slowed down because of their political and military issues there. But certainly West Africa outside of Nigeria is not slowing down. I think Ghana is doing fantastically well on every dimension, not just economics, but just in terms of their progress on things like education, on rule of law, on good governance. Again, what we need is kind of Nigeria to come to the party, and then we'll see. We'll see if we see that kind of 6, 8, or double-digit growth in Nigeria. All the other places doing well outside of South Africa, sub-Saharan Africa will do well. But let's not buy into this narrative that comes from, as I said, in many cases, I think dubious statistics. And there's been this cheerleading for the kind of rapid recovery outside of Africa, which, as I said, is just before our eyes is melting away.
Line of the conversation quite interesting. So you're calling into doubt some of the statistics that are coming about, looking at the actual reality on ground for many of these economies. Why do you think the statistics are going in a different direction than the reality you're saying that you're seeing?
Well, it's difficult to collect these statistics. You think of poor Dr. Kale, who just retired as the statistician general and one of Nigeria's great public servants, trying to measure the size of the economy, what's going on every quarter with a few field agents, a few hundred field agents armed with tablets in a country of 200 million people, with all the issues that we know that are faced here. More than half of our economy is informal. We have enormous kind of amount of imports, invisible imports, because of this Aboki system. But if you look at some other indicators in Nigeria, I mean, cement sales. So we're being told there's 30% unemployment, and yet cement sales are booming in the country, just as one example on that. So I think that these official statistics often don't capture the full range of economic activity. I think what we're going to see over the next few years, and we would really like to see from PwC, is more real-time statistics about things like the mobility data, spatial data, transaction data combined to have a better view of the economy. I mean, we already know this anyway at a certain level. South Africa just rebased, so they increased their GDP by 11%. So what does that mean? It means all of the thinking that was done with their GDP before was not really accurate, because you were thinking the economy was 11% smaller than it was. They've rebased it. We're coming up for another rebasing. I can't even remember how much we rebased back in 2013 or 2012. I think it was about 50%. I'm expecting it rebasing of at least 20 to 25%. So our economy is bigger than we think. There's more activity going on in the economy than we think. And I think the multilateral agencies and people like the World Bank, they're using our national statistics, which are not fully accurate. People sometimes think the World Bank does a separate exercise of the IMF. That's not true. They're just recycling their own statistics. So I'm very skeptical of these stories that come out. As I said, I think in this post-COVID world, we've had this narrative of the rest of the world doing fantastic and of sub-Saharan Africa lagging. And I think both of these are, to some extent, myths that need to be examined more carefully.
So as you were talking, you spoke earlier about South Africa's economy being one of those that pulled down some of the numbers and reality for sub-Saharan Africa. What was going on with Africa's most industrialized nation that it would be a drag rather than something that drives the overall general numbers we see coming out? Because according, again, to statistics, even though you're calling those into question, excluding South Africa and Nigeria, there's a faster rebound happening in most of the sub-Saharan Africa region. So what's going on particularly with South Africa and Nigeria that they're not leading as they would be expected to be doing this particular recovery, if you agree with those numbers there, or at least with that trend?
Well, you're exactly right. And, we've also said for years, because we to some extent also have to use the official numbers, that sub-Saharan Africa has done just fine. It's being dragged down by the two giants, by South Africa and by Nigeria. But the issues in those two countries are quite different. But specifically for the COVID situation, I think we're going to have a lot more science in the next few years. But if you look at the medical impact, the health impact, the death rate in South Africa, it really was very difficult for that country, the same way that the US, the UK, India went through a very difficult period. And of course, that's going to translate as it's a terrible human toll, but also a terrible toll on the economy. So they shrunk 8% on that. So they had all of their structural problems going into it as they dealt with issues coming out of the Zuma presidency and the state capture issues there, and that had really retarded their economic growth and kept people in poverty and unemployment. And then just as President Ramaphosa was trying to deal with some of these issues, they got hit very hard medically with COVID. Now, so this calls into a very interesting question. I think that all of us should be trying to find the answer to. I mean, there were dire predictions about what would happen medically, health-wise, with COVID in sub-Saharan Africa. And yet we have not had, as far as I can tell, nearly the same impact. I mean, to contrast a little bit, if you take Peru, it's perhaps, I think, the per capita, the worst hit country, at least on the official statistics. I think that the deaths are maybe over 3,000 per million, which is just extraordinary. So it's a country with similar socioeconomic conditions to much of sub-Saharan Africa, or better in many cases, and yet they've had a terrible death rate, and we haven't had it here. Now, my personal view, it's just an opinion, is we will find some reason for this in the next few years. It will either be cultural, it will either perhaps be genetic, it will be something about the environment. Maybe it's because of cross immunity, because so many people in sub-Saharan Africa have immunity from hepatitis and suffer from hepatitis, suffer from malaria, and perhaps it gives them cross immunity. But we have not had that health impact that we've seen elsewhere. So, but to pull these, as I said before, South Africa and Nigeria, we've said for years, both have to do better to help the whole continent and help themselves, but they have different issues. So with respect to Nigeria, yes, the economy is probably bigger than we think, but the country is richer. We still have a long way to go in terms of unlocking the dead assets, which is one of the big issues that we talk about. We have a long way to go in terms of developing more of a service-oriented export economy. We have a lot of potential in exporting agriculture. All of these things are on the agenda. I've seen really good progress over the last 5 or 6 in particular, despite some of the headline numbers, and I'm optimistic. In terms of South Africa, of course, I'm not resident there, though I actually was born in South Africa and spent a lot of time there. And they have different issues, structural issues. They're really struggling as a society to kind of come to a landing on how to move forward. They have extreme, you think we have extreme inequality here. They have much more extreme inequality in South Africa. And of course, they're still some 27 years after Nelson Mandela was president, they're still struggling with the legacy of apartheid. So they have some issues to deal with. But I'm confident. I mean, I think with President Ramaphosa, and I think with the changes the progress that we've made here, particularly the last 4 or 5 years under His Excellency President Buhari, I'm really optimistic. And of course, if we get these two, if you think in the headline GDP numbers, if we get these two countries going, and then in addition to all the other bright spots, Kenya, Rwanda, Ivory Coast, Senegal, Ghana, I mean, I think that we'll see really Africa take off. So I'm very optimistic. And as I said, I am, though, negative on this narrative, that's negative narrative that keeps being told using statistics to me that in many cases quite dubious.
A very valid point there, and a lot of questions, especially from the medical side, that many people are looking for answers. But very quickly, let me ask you, bring up the issue of vaccines, and whether we like it or not, Africa is not succeeding in vaccinating as many people as we would like. And we're having the conversation about the vaccine inequality, Africa producing its own vaccines. But all of that is also something that comes back to the economy. About 50% of populations are now vaccinated in advanced economies, while you have about 3.5 for under 5% of Africa's population being vaccinated. How is this process rebounding or affecting the recovery, the growth that we're all looking for on the continent right now? Because the vaccines just are not there for the populations that many of these countries have.
Well, as I said before, we're going to have to understand the medical science behind this, because you would think if we had only 3.5% of people vaccinated, we should be having a much higher death rate. I mean, there's still some COVID deaths in Nigeria, but it's nothing like what's happening back in the December-January period, for example, on that. So I don't think, and of course, I mean, I'm in Abuja right now. You can see my background's in Abuja. It's a background picture, but it's actually where I am at the moment. Like literally, that's the view that I have in Abuja, which is lovely. And in Abuja, many people, of course, who are in the higher income groups are vaccinated. They travel. They're aware of all this. I think the procedures in Abuja are very good. I mean, when you enter buildings and use of masks, limiting meetings, social distancing, I think is all performed very well. So I think the country is doing quite well. And I think we're kind of moving to this post-COVID period where things are starting to happen. But in terms of harming our economic trajectory here. I think that obviously we should continue with vaccines, and of course, African countries better than anyone understand the importance of vaccines and mass rollout, particularly in the urban areas where it's more likely to spread. So I think that as we get more vaccines, and I don't think we have the vaccine hesitancy that has shown up in some countries. So, I think that's going to go ahead. But I think the bigger problem in terms of our economic recovery, certainly in Nigeria, is the travel restrictions. And of course, we all understand they're necessary, but they make it very difficult, specifically for foreign direct investment, because foreign direct investment or companies expanding abroad, and of course, it counts for Nigeria because they want to expand abroad. You have to physically go somewhere. You have to make deals. You have to hire people. You have to invest in physical capital. And that's really hard these days with all of the travel restrictions. So I think we'll be quite subdued in some sectors while that's going on. But of course, the other thing that's happened, and I think Africa has done a good job, certainly Nigeria has done a good job, my clients have done a good job, is people have learned some new ways of working. And so, you always think people aren't going to adapt, but we adapted very quickly and things are going on. So as I said, what I'm more worried about from the economic break on the country, certainly in Nigeria, is the FDI at the moment. The vaccine issue is something that we should solve in Africa. I mean, particularly if COVID becomes a chronic condition that people expect it did, we need annual boosters, things like that. But for the moment, I'm not putting the vaccination rate in Africa, and certainly in Nigeria, as the top of our economic issues.
Right, so maybe the vaccines are just not as absolutely important or a priority to economic recovery as many of us might think. We're going to continue this conversation on the other side of the break, and we'll be looking at what are some of the positives that have possibly come out of the COVID-19 pandemic for African countries who may have seized the opportunity to foster structural and macroeconomic reforms. The conversation continues after this. Dr. Andrew Nevin, Chief Economist and Partner at PwC Nigeria, is my guest as we look at some trends for Sub-Saharan Africa's possible growth in the coming or in this year before we wrap things up. So, Andrew, let's look at this. There have been opportunities inside, unfortunately, this storm of COVID, and we're seeing some countries take advantage of that in terms of structural reforms as well as macroeconomic reforms. What do you think is some of the good that you're seeing, particularly with an economy like Nigeria, that we've had to take in this very difficult time?
Well, I think one thing that has just been a huge boon to Nigeria is the recognition that so many high-valued activities can be done remotely. So around even a little bit earlier, we were talking about the export of Nigerian brains. We started out by putting out the paper a while back just to point out how critical the diaspora was economically, but then, which is an export of Nigerian brains. Then we said we could export Nigerian brains without people leaving Nigeria. So we always cite the national heroin Amazon, who's started a business process outsourcing group, founded it, that's in Kaduna and Abuja, and also in Maiduguri starting up. She has 1,200 seats. So she is exporting high value added services out of Nigeria to UK and US companies, paid in FX, 1,200 seats. I mean, it's just the university graduates. They all support their families, a large number of people. So it's just fantastic. But what's happened with COVID now is there's much more understanding of how you can do services remotely. So this effect of exporting high value added Nigerian brains while people stay in Nigeria is just accelerating it. And you see it at the institutional level. So groups like Amal Hassan's Outsource Global and others are expanding. You see it as international companies are coming and doing more and more within Nigeria because we have very talented programmers and other technology professionals at relatively low wages, so a little bit like India in the 1990s. And we're also seeing it at individual level. I know lots of individuals in finance and in IT that are hooked into global supply chains. So I think that for Nigeria is fantastic. And to be honest, we have advocated that as a better export strategy than trying to enter low-end manufacturing. Just explain this for a minute. If you think about someone entering, if I was doing an animation film and I needed 500 animators, I can insert 5 animators from Nigeria into that 500-person team remotely. I can try that out, and it's simple, it scales, it's resilient. If I want to start low-end manufacturing, like some people, particularly the politicians, have advocated, and I wanted to build a factory that produced table fans or fans, low-end manufacturing, similar strategy to South Korea or China, of course, back in the 80s, South Korea in the 70s. I would have to put the entire business system, logistical system together for the fans. I'd have to build the entire factory to produce one fan. I'd have to import all the machinery, and I have to train all the workers. So it's actually, and of course, we all know the difficulties of going in or out of Nigeria. So in terms of driving exports, we have really advocated that this is a boon for us here in COVID, because we can sell so many more high value added exports without people leaving Nigeria, without having to deal with our logistical issues. I mean, obviously they need power and they need bandwidth, but they don't need a lot of power. You don't need huge plants for power. You just need some power and some bandwidth to participate in this. So for that viewpoint, I think it's been advantageous for Nigeria. And I think at a global level, and I think it's important for us too, two other sort of bigger issues I think have emerged. One is just recognizing that GDP isn't everything. So I think Nigeria has made a lot of progress on shifting from what we call a GDP lens to a sustainable development goal lens. So I think by now, I'm sure everyone on our show today is familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals from the United Nations, and they're very intuitive things. There's no poverty and hunger, meaningful work, life underwater, gender equality. And those are much more important goals than GDP per se. And I think we've done a good
Andrew,
job.
let me interject here quickly. I had wanted to ask you about in terms of the structural reforms you might be seeing from the government side, but I need to move on because of time. In terms of what could derail the projected growth, the projected recovery we're seeing, what do you think can take us off the path, can take Sub-Saharan Africa away from this path of recovery that we're seeing now? Climate change is a major issue. We know that the COP meeting is coming up as well, the conversation around advanced economies, putting together that money, but that's something we cannot control. Factors within our control that could possibly derail the growth that Africa is looking for coming out of COVID-19. What do you think they are?
Well, I think, as I said, many countries I think are doing well. I think they're on a good path. I'll cite Ghana. Yeah, things could go wrong, but they've now got momentum over 15 good years at least of movement in the right direction. I think for us specifically in Nigeria, we still have some way to go in some of the structural changes that we're doing. We still have too much complexity. We haven't implemented the oil report. We continue to have the fuel subsidy, which really drains our coffers and encourages corruption and diversion. We continue to have the exchange rate issue, which has to be resolved. I mean, we said in 2016 in the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan that we would have a market-determined exchange rate. The central bank has made steps in this direction. Was getting there, and then we sort of got derailed by COVID and the oil price decline a year and a half ago, year and 5 months ago. So those are the things that can derail us. We haven't quite pushed through the structural reforms to the ground level. I think in Nigeria, the way I would characterize it, I think there's will at the top, at the kind of federal government level, and many of the ministers. But when it gets translated on the ground, you still have too much complexity for business, which is made too much complexity, too much cost, too much uncertainty, which is really holding us back. That said, I think we're making progress on that, but we really have to push through some of these reforms just to allow people to get on and construct their enterprises, particularly at the state level. I mean, one encouraging sign we've seen is many governors have emerged that have done a very good job in their state. They're focused on education. They're focused on core infrastructure. They're focused on attracting companies that deal with what they have, whether it's agriculture or some other resource on that. But we can be derailed in Nigeria by just not pushing through this reduction in difficulty in doing business.
All right, Andrew, we'll leave it at that for now. There are a lot of conversations. We have a few more months to the end of the year. Projections for 2022, the rebasing exercise, as well as you mentioned, really finding a feel for what is the true size of Nigeria's economy and how that can be put to use for the continent's largest economy as it stands. Dr. Andrew Nevin, thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you, Tolu.
All right, so we'll see you soon. And ultimately, the issue around economic recovery for not just Nigeria, not just South Africa, but all of Sub-Saharan Africa will hinge on the policies, the movements, and the actions that governments around the continent will make. The growth and the recovery may be uneven, but there is one goal at the end of that path: recovery, progress, and prosperity for Africans. You're watching Business Edge. When we come back, it's NC4 to watch. And as we give you a few stories we're keeping our eyes on, let's do that starting in West Africa. Now in Ghana, the National Petroleum Authority and Burkina Faso Société Nationale Burkinabé des Hydrocarbures have started dialogue to improve petroleum product supply. Ghana sells petroleum products to Burkina Faso. Now, the discussion is reviewing the export and transit arrangements meant to strengthen the collaborations between Ghana and Burkina Faso in relation to the supply of petroleum products. South Africa's energy crisis may threaten the anticipated economic rebound in the fourth quarter of this year, just as prospects are expected to pick up on the back of the July unrest and lockdown restrictions. Last week, Eskom resumed its rolling blackouts, implementing a week of stage 2 scheduled power cuts, what the utility terms load shedding from Thursday, due to breakdowns at generation units. The fight to discourage fake news is getting a boost. Now, Google, the parent company of YouTube, has announced it will start demonetizing content on the platform that includes climate change denial. According to reports, not only will Google demonetize the content, but it will also limit monetization tools to creators who post videos that deny climate change. And finally, Nigeria's Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, has announced a possible increase in the tax of carbonated drinks, which would lead to a price increase. She said that this will be part of the additions in the 2021 Finance Act, which will take effect from January 2022. And that's it. You can find us on social media. We're at News Central TV. Follow us on YouTube and subscribe. And of course, download our mobile app to take us with you wherever you go. Look for our websites and of course, watch us wherever we are available to you. We're live on Star Times channel 274 and we are also live on Avo TV channel 23. I'm Tolu Adeleru Balogun. Have a good one. I'll be back 11 a.m. West African time.